Thank you. All right, I need to apologize to my staff. I told them a while ago that I wanted this to be a big tent event. An event where we got students, parents, families, donors, supporters, faculty, all together. And boy, we did it, but like, wow, what a squeeze. That's amazing. So thank you. Thank you for everybody that's been involved in getting this done. All right, so 5 years ago, the University of Austin didn't exist. But tonight, we have more than 500 people celebrating and being part of our rebellion. So good evening and welcome. I want to acknowledge the people who made this possible, so many of you in this room. First, our trustees, Terry Andreessen, Brent Bellman, Niall Ferguson, Joe Lonsdale, Alex Magaro, Scott Malcolm, Andrew Truesdale, and Barry Weiss. Thank you for your leadership and your belief in this institution from the very beginning. We also have many donors here who wrote checks to UATX before we had a campus, a curriculum, or a single student. Thank you for your vision and for your trust. We have families who entrusted us with their sons and daughters, an act of faith that we do not take lightly. We have faculty who walked away from established institutions because they believe this mission matters more. And we have a staff who runs the leanest university operation in America. We have some of the most talented young people in the room. Not only our students, current students, but many of you who are today considering still joining us this coming fall at UATX. And I promise you that every weekend is just like this weekend that you spend here. Finally, I need to acknowledge that we have with us Jeff Yass, whose recent $100 million gift changed the trajectory of this institution. This gift created an entirely new model for higher education, one where the university takes no government money, charges no tuition, owes nothing to anyone, and lives and dies by whether it delivers value to its students. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Jeff and Janine Yass. 5 years ago, the question was whether this institution would even exist. That question is settled. The question now is how many extraordinary young people we can find and form into the leaders America needs. So tonight, to help celebrate our progress, we are honored to have with us Ben Shapiro. But first, to introduce Ben, I'd like to welcome to the stage UATX founder and one of the great historians of our time, Sir Niall Ferguson.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, it is just a huge delight to be here to introduce one of the great intellects, writers, publicists of his generation. And it's appropriate that Ben is our speaker tonight, because in a way, Ben is somebody who personifies what it is that we are trying to build here. Ben is a polymath. It's almost depressing to list all the talents and achievements this man has to his name. He grew up in an Orthodox Jewish household in California and was a musical prodigy before he'd even reached the age of 10. He's an accomplished violinist. He graduated summa cum laude from UCLA at the age of 20. Then there was a lapse because he went to Harvard. And I'm afraid to say he has a degree, a law degree, from that institution, which is an illustration of why we needed to build UATX so that the next Ben Shapiro won't have to do that and will be able to come here instead of to Cambridge. Not satisfied with practicing law, Ben founded a media company, the Daily Wire. He hosts the Ben Shapiro Show, which I'm told, and I checked this with AI, so it must be true, is the 6th most popular podcast in the United States. That is no mean feat for somebody who has never concealed from the world his firm conservative and libertarian principles. Now, it gets more annoying from here. He's written 16 books. Damn it, that's as many as I've written. One of the earliest ones, I recommend it, was Brainwashed: How Universities Indoctrinate America's Youth. That was published in 2004. Most people in 2004 had absolutely no idea of what was going to go wrong, what was already going wrong in the established universities in this country. And I include myself in that. In 2004, I just began teaching at the H place. It took me 10 years to realize what Ben already knew then. In 2019, he published The Right Side of History: How Reason and Moral Purpose Made the West Great. That is a history book. Ben, please. There are no lanes in Shapiro land. He has even rapped with Tom MacDonald. It's quite good, though. He speaks abnormally slowly when he raps. Ladies and gentlemen, the worst thing about all of this is that Ben Shapiro is 20 years younger than I am. And as you may be about to discover, he talks 20 times faster. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Ben Shapiro.
Thank you so much. That's very kind of you. Thank you. First of all, it's an honor and a pleasure to be here at one of the most important institutions in America, University of Austin. It takes tremendous innovation, creativity, and courage to put together a brand new institution dedicated to the restoration of what a university was originally supposed to be. And the people at University of Austin are, I think, maybe the only people in the country who had the balls to do it. So good for them. Well, today, I want to talk a little bit about why we seem to hate each other so much here in the United States. I want to talk about why we are obsessed with conspiracies and steeped in anger, and apparently ready to spend large segments of our day fulminating on the internet about people we don't know on topics that we know nothing about. And the simple answer is the failure of our institutions. Trust in our institutions in the United States is at an all-time low that is across the board. Trust in the media is at an all-time low. Trust in church is at an all-time low. Trust in the scientific establishment is at an all-time low. Trust in government is at an all-time low. And of course, trust in academia is at an all-time low. And because of our lack of trust in institutions, Americans also mistrust one another. Now, you might think that it would be the opposite, that we mistrust one another, therefore we mistrust our institutions. That's not really the case. Our institutions shape us. And the way that we interact with the world is through the mechanism of institution. If you grow up in a religious community, going to church helps shape you. The rules of the church shape you. The people you hang out with shape you. The institution of your family shapes you. Your school shapes you. Your university shapes you. And as we lose faith in all of those institutions to shape us, we are incapable of coming together anymore. See, you don't mistrust the people with whom you are oriented. Institutions tend to foster a common orientation. This is, of course, why Alexis de Tocqueville was such a big fan of them. It's why in Democracy in America, he made the suggestion that one of the things that made America so different from all other countries was the plethora of social institutions in which Americans were enmeshed. that in most other countries, people had formal institutions that they were forced to interact with, but in America, everybody was a member of a social institution or many social institutions, and that created this extraordinary social fabric that was durable, that allowed for innovation, that allowed for freedom. Because without trust, there really can't be freedom at all. If the institutions, which provide the shaping function that set the rules for our lives, the way we interact with the world, if those die, so too does the social fabric. And then when the social fabric dies, we stop attributing to each other decent motivation. Instead, we start engaging in what the philosopher Alasdair MacIntyre called emotivism, this belief that everybody except for you is motivated by something nefarious. And so instead of having a political conversation, what you do is you just attribute a motive to the person's policy. So just to give a quick example, last week, a couple weeks ago, I was speaking at the University of Pennsylvania, and there was a student who got up, and that student started asking about Obamacare, and started off the question talking about the differences in policy between Republicans and Democrats on health care. Now, that's a very complicated topic because obviously the United States has a very heavily regulated and subsidized system. Even if you wanted to unwind it, it's very difficult to do so. There are a lot of moving parts. It's not an easy question. But what made the question, I think, sort of telling is that he finished the question by saying, why do people who want to change the healthcare system want tens of thousands of people to die? Right, that's emotivism, right? That is the idea that the person who disagrees with you on policy does so not because they have an honest differential assessment of the evidence or different premises from which they are working. Instead, that person disagrees with you because they actually want people to die. And that's what happens when you lack trust in the people around you. You've never actually said this, unless you're a very young child in my family, to other members of your family. And my kids say it to each other, but that's because my kids are, 12, 10, 6, 2, and in the womb. So that takes a second when you have that many. But unless you're a child, you shouldn't be attributing motivations to other people unless you have good evidence that their motivation is malign. But that's what we jump to when there is no trust, because I trust my wife. I'm not worried that when she criticizes me, it's coming from a terrible place. I trust the people that I go to synagogue with. If they have a critique or we have a disagreement, not even a critique, I don't immediately jump to, they do it because they hate me. And you're doing it because you hate me is the death of politics. Because if that's the case, then how exactly are we supposed to live together and work together and create policy together? Our institutions have been rotted out. They've maintained a lot of their power, but they've retained none of their original philosophy. These sort of foundations upon which they were built have been rotted away. I've said before on my show that a lot of our institutions are being worn around kind of like a Hannibal Lecter skin suit. They're still only animate because they're being worn around by something foreign. Our truth-making institutions used to be rooted in truth, and now they're rooted in power. And in the world of truth, power is narrative. And so, for example, if you look at how the media covers stories, the media is no longer interested predominantly in facts and evidence. Instead, the media are interested in what are the narratives, how do we exercise power, and then how do we mobilize some small number of facts and evidence, or maybe not even facts and evidence, in order to support that narrative. It's all reverse engineering of the factual reporting of the evidence that is presented. And the most egregious form of this, of course, in the social media sphere, is when you move from narrative to outright conspiracy theory, where you just jettison the evidence entirely, and you just go with whatever is the purest form of narrative that gets you where you need to go. That's how you get to the idea, for example, that Erica Kirk must have been involved in the murder of her husband, right? There's no evidence of this. It is factually unbased. It is insane. But there are an enormous number of people who believe it because for some other narrative reason, they wish for it to be true. There's some manipulation of the American system by malign foreign powers, or the entire institution of TPUSA has been perverted from the inside, right? If you have a narrative in your head and evidence, in fact, no longer matter to you, then you can push any narrative using any conspiracy theory that you want. Churches used to be truth-making institutions, spiritual truths, like baseline morality. The whole purpose of a church, the whole purpose of any religion, is to present eternal truths that stand the test of time. Now, of course, all churches, all synagogues, are going to stick and move with the application of those morals. There can be lots of arguments, and there always are, on the application of eternal morals to temporal principles. But the question of whether the church ought to pursue truth has sort of been supplanted by the idea that churches ought to do politics. And again, I don't believe that my rabbi shouldn't sign into politics when it's relevant, but the idea that churches have basically become, in many instances, sort of progressive bastions where people go to eat pizza and play guitar rather than unite with some eternal value, that is why people don't go to church anymore. Why go to church? You can go to a ball game. There's no reason. The scientific establishment moved from evidence to narrative, from truth to narrative. We saw that most obviously during COVID. And the result of that was not a sort of moderate critique of science. The result for an enormous number of people was to completely discard science in favor of woo-woo nonsense that has zero evidence to back it. Again, the slide from truth to narrative is almost invariably followed by a slide from narrative to conspiracism or nonsense. You can see that in the world of science very, very clearly. We were told a lot of lies about, for example, the efficacy of masks or the ability of vaccines to prevent transmission of the COVID virus. And the backlash to that was all in pursuit of a narrative. And the backlash to that was, what if we don't do vaccines ever again? Like, people just won't take vaccines. Vaccines must be bad. And instead, we're going to rely on whatever we heard on some third-rate podcast from a person who doesn't know a kidney from a spleen. And then, obviously, when it comes to academia, this is clearly true. The destruction of truth in favor of social engineering has been ongoing for decades in the United States. This is nothing new. We watched the apotheosis during the sort of woke revolution that happened over the course of the last 10, 15 years, but it's been going on for a very long time. The first book that I ever wrote, I'm now middle-aged, so when I started this, I was your age. When I started working in this field, I was 17. So I've been doing this now for 25 years, because I'm now 42. The first book that I wrote was a book called Brainwashed: How Universities Indoctrinate America's Youth. That book was written in 2004. Okay, and that book was all about liberal indoctrination on college campuses. I was at UCLA at the time. I was a junior when I wrote it. And not much has changed, except that it's gotten, in many ways, worse. And that happened because professors decided, back in the 1960s, essentially, professors and administrators decided to cave to activist students because they did not have the courage of their own principles. And in doing so, they turned over the purpose of a university, which is emblazoned on pretty much all of the insignia of every major university, which they then all ignore. Right, where I went for law school, Harvard, the insignia says veritas on it. The last time that Harvard met veritas, it's been a century. It's been a long, long time. The move from truth to we are going to engineer a population of discontented people who believe that the system must be turned on its ear, that is what college became. It was still good in some STEM areas, obviously, when it came to science and tech, but when it came to the liberal arts, or to the idea that you were actually trying to generate good, productive citizens in the fullest sense of the word, people who were engaged in their community and who believed in the fundamental principles of their civilization, these universities decided to discard all of that. And so, naturally, people don't trust the universities anymore. And this was mirrored in a radical distrust of our government. See, the thing about the way the American government is built is that it was built to really pursue one fundamental principle above all. And it wasn't even freedom as much as epistemic humility. Because freedom is rooted in a certain level of epistemic humility. What I mean by that is the idea you might not be right. If you think you're always right, then you might want to be a tyrant because you're always right. I'm a tyrant with my children. I'm always right, they're always wrong. Okay, with my wife, I have to have a little bit of epistemic humility because mostly she's right and I'm wrong. And I'll save that one for tapes. I can show her later. But humility with regard to other people in your society, the idea that maybe they're right on occasion, maybe you're wrong on occasion, that again has to be rooted in trust of our fellow citizens. So if all of those truth-making institutions that allowed us to orient towards something useful and good and powerful together, if those all go away and all you're left with is government, and the fundamental basis of your government is respect for your fellow human beings, such that sometimes you might lose. And not only might you lose sometimes, you might have legitimately lost sometimes. And sometimes, even if you win, you don't get what you want, because we have checks and balances in the United States government to prevent the system from swinging side to side radically. The whole point of the American government is to stop things from happening. That is legitimately the point of the American government. Read the Federalist Papers. This is the entire thing. The entire thing is, unless we have very broad agreement on something, it should not happen. That is why we have a bicameral legislature. It is why we have 3 branches of government. There are lots of other countries that don't have these systems, right? This is why we have a federalist system in which the powers of the federal government are enumerated and the powers of the state government are significantly broader. The whole idea is lots of people live lots of different kinds of lives, and you may not like that, but you might also be wrong. And so in order for us to determine what right looks like, there better be a broad agreement on us, but between all of us, to do that thing. And when that wears away, when that wears away, what we end up with when we hate each other is a battle to the death in the blood sport of politics. We get angry at the checks and balances because it's not possible that people who oppose me are right. Those people are malign. Those people want bad things to happen to me and to my family. And so I'm going to grab the government, I'm going to kill the filibuster, I'm going to stack the Supreme Court, I'm going to add states willy-nilly to the United States Senate, and then I'm just going to run right over everybody. And by the way, the sentiment is not a pure left-wing sentiment, although it's very, very often expressed at the top levels of the Democratic Party. It's also expressed at the top levels by some on the Republican side. Sometimes you'll hear it phrased in preemptive tones, right? The left will do it, therefore we must do it first, right? Which is always a get-out-of-jail-free card. But the reality is that in the absence of rebuilding trust in the institutions, what you will end up with is a war of all against all on the governmental level. And things will not go well. And you can see this with regard to how the government is now approaching a wide variety of issues, how Americans want things from the government they never used to want. Checks and balances, when you get rid of the fundamental epistemic humility of the government, checks and balances give way to a centralized tyranny. Free markets, which are rooted in the idea of epistemic humility. The entire marginal theory of value, the idea that was promoted by the Austrian school thinkers in economics, the basic idea that actually value is subjective at the margins. Right? I value a glass of water differently than you value a glass of water, and I value a glass of water differently if I'm in the Sahara Desert than if I'm here in Austin, Texas. Right? That basic idea suggests that there is no possibility of centralizing economics. Right? The entire basis of free market economics, as Hayek would argue, is diffuse knowledge. Right? That everyone in this room has a different idea of what things are worth. And what the price is the aggregate of what we all think that thing is worth. That's what a price looks like. Well, what happens when we don't trust each other? And when we think some of us are screwing other of us? Then we say, well, what if there was a person right at the top who is deciding what's fair? And again, I wish this were only a left-wing phenomenon. It is increasingly a right-wing phenomenon. This idea that somehow free market capitalism is eroding the soul of the American people. Whenever people say that capitalism is what's responsible for the soul sickness in Americans, and you hear this from, I've seen this in places like Compact Magazine, for example. When you see this sort of argument, understand that trying to solve a soul problem with economics is like trying to change a baby diaper with a hammer. It is the wrong tool. That is not what economics are for. Economics and free market economics are about the generation of new and better products at a better and lower price. That is what economics are designed, free market economics are designed to do this. This is what they do better than anything else because of the preservation of private property and because of the diffusion of knowledge. But if you don't trust your neighbor and you think your neighbor's screwing you, you might be very likely to say that maybe the government should just do what you want it to do. Grab that brass ring and do exactly what you want with that power. And in the realm of equal rights before law, which is, of course, what all freedom is predicated on and rooted in, the idea that all of us, we have different skills and abilities. Some of us are tall and some of us are short, some are smart, some are stupid, right? But we all have equal rights before the law. Once we lose the trust in our institutions, you fall back on tribal solidarity, which is why you will see people saying that certain types of crimes from certain type of people should be excused. If they look like you or if they're part of your tribe, it's fine. As opposed to if they're part of the other tribe, in which case, the law. Now, none of this is simply solved by jawing at one another. This is another one of these great internet myths, that if we have debates with one another on these particular issues, that it actually solves the problem. There's this bizarre notion online, this sort of debate bro culture, that if you yell at each other a lot in short spurts, that somehow this solves the problem. And this is based on a fundamental misreading of John Stuart Mill. John Stuart Mill, of course, suggesting that liberty was the best pathway toward truth. Well, it's the best pathway except for all the others, but meaning it's the worst pathway except for all the others, meaning there is no guarantee that at the end of a debate, the best side wins. That has never been the guarantee. In order for a solid debate, a solid discussion to take place, there must be a fundamental sharing of values, rules of the road, you might call them. Western civilization, there ought not be debate about fundamental propositions. Truly. Because if you are having to debate individual value, like the idea that individual human beings have individual worth, you are arguing with something outside the system. If you have to argue with somebody about the worthiness of truth, that is not an argument that can ever be won, because truth itself is an assumed value. This is why in the Declaration of Independence, when the founders say that there are certain rights that are self-evident, they don't mean that they prove themselves. They mean that these are the fundamental building blocks of a society, and if you question them, the society crumbles. Because no values are self-evident. No baby comes into the world with values that are self-evident. That's not the way that it works. But one of the things that we've decided as a sort of internet culture is that if we debate the fundamental propositions of things like private property or free speech or freedom of religion, that somehow things get wildly better. And I mean, I'd just like to point out that all of those things were actually come to, in a sort of Burkean sense, by human experience, not by logic. We did not argue ourselves into freedom of religion. We had a bunch of bloody wars, and then we decided, hey, you know what'd be great? Freedom of religion. We did not argue ourselves into free speech. We had a bunch of people who were burned at the stake, and then we decided, hey, you know what? This is too much of that. Let's not do that anymore. Private property was not the outgrowth of people arguing themselves into private property. It was the outgrowth of the experience of centuries of poverty and death and despair. And if you have to argue your way back into private property, this doesn't mean you can't and shouldn't defend it. You should. But if the idea is that you can only win this debate on the fundamental basis of speaking it out, that's not right. Human experience has something to say about this as well, which is why it is so dangerous what is happening right now, because it takes centuries to build the institutions that we are taking minutes to destroy. Only a carefully cultivated moral culture that values truth and evidence and logic and moral decency, that actually protects free speech and property rights and equal rights under the law, is capable of restoring our institutions. We shouldn't be debating about the fundamental moral matters. Things like lying is wrong. If I have to debate you about that, there's no debate. Or that truth is superior to falsehood. There can be no debate about this. Or that individual human beings have moral worth and that their autonomy has moral value. Those are the values that we begin with, and those are the values that need to be embodied in institutions. And that's why, bringing it all the way back to the beginning, that's why University of Austin is really valuable. Because University of Austin takes as its fundamental presuppositions, the building blocks upon which you can actually erect a civilization, the most important fundamentals of that civilization. Now, they can give you all the justification for all those principles. I can too. If you read the literature, you can do it. But the point is that that is already there. It doesn't have to be erected de novo. It doesn't have to be remade from nothing. And so the case for University of Austin is that it is a brand new institution built on very old things. It is a brand new institution that is taking the foundations that have been cast aside by all of these institutions, and it is taking those and it is building a new institution atop the foundations that have been discarded. There is no more important work. And if you're considering coming here, if you're already here, congratulations, because you're making the right choice. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Ben, for coming here. It's a huge honor to have Ben Shapiro. It's a very, very fitting as one of the most eloquent defenders of our civilization and the principles that we build it on. I'm going to ask a few questions, then we're going to go to the audience for questions, so you guys can start thinking of things you want to ask Ben. Ben, to start with, I think you called university a $200,000 IQ test a couple times. And it's interesting right now. Yale actually did publish a report where they admitted that some of the lack of trust was the Ivy's fault. I think they didn't cover everything. They talked about bloated administration and the screwed up admissions and the grade inflation. I think they left out maybe like the departments being conquered by people who hate America and some other issues. So, I mean, are you optimistic that in this administration we're going to see reform in some of these universities? Are they going to keep reforming? And then what do you think about people going to university in general in this context?
So I think that you now have to make an affirmative case to go to university, except for this one. But I think that the changes that are being made by the administration right now, unfortunately, are more cosmetic than lasting. It takes a long time to rebuild the foundational trust with an institution, and a couple of lawsuits against Harvard are not going to fundamentally shift its orientation. And the next time a Democrat is elected president, it will flip right back to what it was before. They'll just be a few $1 million poorer for having paid the federal government. That's what is the most likely thing to happen. Now, I think that the model of universities itself is changing, obviously. I think that the notion that you have to shell out $200,000 to get a degree that is going to be made defunct possibly by AI in the next 5 minutes is a pretty dumb idea. But I do think that that opens the possibility of startup institutions like University of Austin. So I'm actually much more optimistic about higher education, not because I'm optimistic about the Ivies, which I think are dying, but because I'm quite optimistic about the replacements for the Ivies, which I think are going to thrive.
Well said. I want to also ask, so I think you covered a lot of principles, especially stuff around, I'd say, the Enlightenment is from what you talked about. And of course, there's other traditions. There's the classical world. There's the Judeo-Christian tradition, which kind of builds our civilization. You're an Orthodox Jew, but I think probably the majority of your listeners are Christian here in the U.S. And like, what are the important things that Christians have to learn from Jews and the Jews have to learn from Christians for our civilization?
Well, I think that I'll start with the things that Jews should learn from Christians. I think that what Jews should learn from Christians is that it is important to speak out publicly on matters of public interest. I think that the Jews have been quite shy about that for a long time, for I think some solid reasons historically. But I will say that it should not just be up to Christian leaders to speak the language of biblical morality. And I've said this to 1,000 Jewish audiences. I should not be the only person in public life who wears a yarmulke who is speaking up on behalf of people going to church and on behalf of eternal values that actually matter to a civilization. So that's what I think Jews should learn. They should be a little more audacious in the way that they address the world on behalf of a morality that we share. What I think that Christians can learn from Jews, again, I'm always hesitant to lecture other religions on what they can learn from my own. I will say one of the fascinating things about the way that the many Christians, I think, perceive Judaism, I've had this conversation with Catholics and Protestants as well. The mistake that I think can be made with religion, and you see this with Reformed Jews as well, so this is not just a Jewish-Christian divide. The notion that broad moral principles are a substitute for particular action is false. So Judaism is very Aristotelian religion in the sense that instead of saying, here are some very high principles, and now go and live your life in accordance with those principles, instead it says, here's a bunch of commandments, and if you do those commandments, then you're going to end up having fulfilled those principles. And I think that's actually the way that we teach our children. The way that we teach our children, the way I teach my kids, is you should do all of these things. We set a bunch of rules for little kids, and then if they do those over and over and over, in the end, we call those rules virtue. As opposed to, let me teach you virtue on sort of a platonic level, on a broad level, and now you go apply that in your life. That tends to fall apart pretty quickly. And so what I would say is effectuate virtue in the world rather than just preaching the principle. Like, go out and do things. Now, Christians, of course, do this. There are a lot of Christians who do this. But I think the temptation sometimes is to say, you know, at least on an ideological level, the things you believe are more important than the things that you do. Both are very, very important. But the stuff that's going to impact people around you more is the stuff that you do rather than the stuff you believe, even if the stuff that gets you into heaven is the stuff you believe rather than the stuff that you do.
Well said. One more for me. I'm not sure I ran these by him, so this is a sensitive one. So we have a lot of entrepreneurs and builders in the audience, and we're both entrepreneurs as well. You've built an extraordinary media company, obviously having huge impact. And I want to ask, you hired a lot of very, very talented people. Not all of them turned out to have characters to match their talent. And
we noticed, yeah.
What would your lessons be from that, or what advice would you give to aspiring entrepreneurs about how to think about this challenge?
Regrets, we have a few. There are certain, let's put it this way, I think that everyone in the process of entrepreneurialism makes mistakes. If I had been able to foresee where things would have gone with, say, a Candace Owens, not to just name names, then obviously we would have made some different decisions originally. You're going to try, you're going to fail. That's the case. The one thing I will say is that we deserve blame for having made a decision that I think was undefined at the beginning. I'll say that we should have had a better track record in terms of the sort of political philosophy of Candace Owens, for example, before we hired her. I will say that the thing that is most important and the thing that's most difficult in business is when your business interest comes up against your moral stance, because we also did fire her. And that is the thing that you can never give up. When you give up the moral stance, then you've given up the reason to start the business in the first place. I didn't get into this to make money. Thank God I've made a lot of money, but that's not why I got into it. I got into it because I actually cared about the underlying principles. The further you stray from those principles, the more you tear away at your soul. And so what I would just recommend to everybody, myself included, is that every day you should wake up and you should think what's good for my soul and then what's good for my business, not the other way around.
All right, help me out here, guys, before I get myself in trouble. We have any questions from the audience? We have microphones back there? There we go. Good start here. Line up, perfect. The students know how to do it. We'll do it this way. Go ahead.
In our American experiment class, we learned about how Lincoln connected the Declaration of Independence to why slavery should be ended, or by the end of his arguments. Do you think it was a mistake to connect the ideals of the Declaration of Independence to law in the American imagination?
The ideals to law? I mean, what Lincoln said about the Declaration of Independence is he suggested that it was that the Constitution was the frame of silver surrounding the apple of gold being the Declaration. The basic idea that the Declaration is law, it's law in the sense that it is a guiding principle, but it's very hard to derive black letter law from the Declaration of Independence. And so you have to read that in consilience with the Constitution was the case that Lincoln was making. And it is a really complicated legal case, frankly. I mean, it's very interesting to read the arguments and counter-arguments leading up to the Civil War about the application of the Constitution to the issue of slavery. But the idea that what Lincoln was doing was reading the Constitution in light of the Declaration, that I think is correct. I think that the sort of hard divide that was made by the secessionists between the Declaration saying this is not law and the Constitution saying this is law, that's ideologically wrong and un-American. And so I think Lincoln was right to link the two. And I think that the mistake would be to de-link in the other direction the Declaration from the Constitution. Say the Constitution is not important, the principles of the Declaration are what's important. That's how you end up with the idea that on the basis of vague pursuit of happiness standards, the government can do whatever it wants, as opposed to the actual limitations of that frame of silver.
Thank you.
Hi, Ben. I'm a Noah Hyde from Houston, and I've always been fascinated by government. One of our 7 laws in our religion is to establish courts of justice. In other words, to make good government. Where would you say that is most needed in our government, whether state or federal? Where is it most needed?
The biggest thing that's needed in government is for the federal government to go back to its constitutional boundaries, which of course is never going to happen, but it's a nice idea. The truth is that the state governments were given extraordinary powers under the federal Constitution. The original amendments have nothing to do whatsoever with the states. So for example, the First Amendment, which declares freedom of speech, says literally Congress shall make no law abridging freedom of speech. It does not say that states shall make no law abridging. Now, there are mirror provisions in virtually every state constitution in the original colonies, but the idea that there's a strange sort of balance. I actually have a political philosophy book that I wrote that has not been published yet and may one day. But the basic thing that I talk about in that book is the idea that the place where you can do and it's appropriate to do the most legislation is the place where you need the least, and vice versa. So in your local community, in your HOA, there are a lot of informal things that don't need to be codified because you know all of your neighbors and you know your family members, but that would also be the place where theoretically a lot of rules could theoretically apply because there's a lot of agreement. As you abstract up the chain, there should be fewer rules because there's less agreement. And instead, we seem to do the reverse. The idea being we don't need any rules at the local level, but we need lots of rules at the federal level. That's a huge, huge, huge mistake. It's one of the reasons why we have such knockdown, drag-out battles over the federal government. Now, former Texas Governor Rick Perry, who, again, I was actually originally supportive when he ran for president in 2012, and then his campaign flamed out over his inability to name agencies. Governor Perry had, I thought, the best line of the campaign, which was he wanted to make Washington, D.C. irrelevant to your life. That sounds fantastic. I would love to not care who the president is, truly. I would love to not care. And instead, we spend every minute of every day caring who the president is, whether it's Democrat or Republican, whether he is, comatose or whether he's tweeting, which seems to be the only 2 possible options for each party, variously.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ben.
Hey, Ben. I am an evangelical Christian and a huge fan of yours. Listen to you about every single day for 8 years, so I wanted you to know that before I ask this question. And this is maybe a softball of sorts, but I've been really intrigued by what's gone on with Tucker Carlson over the last year. I can't figure it out. I told a friend of mine in California, Matt, I said, something switched. I don't know what's going on with him. And now I just hear him say one thing one time and something else 3 weeks later. I mean, he recently said Israel was a beautiful country, gorgeous, wonderful place.
Hideously ugly, 5 seconds later, yeah.
Yeah. So I thought I would like to hear your theory, because it's such a radical, it's one thing to have a reasoned critique of Gaza and whatever, but this seems so crazy and such a 180. I would love to hear your thoughts.
So I try not to get into Tucker's head, although I seem to take up an enormous amount of space in his head rent-free. But when it comes to what Tucker has been doing, when I spoke about truth making way for narrative, making way for conspiracy, I think that's clearly what's happened with Tucker. I think that the first indicator that I thought that Tucker Carlson was going off the reservation was actually significantly earlier than anyone else. I've been saying that I think that Tucker's ideas are quite dangerous and that he's demagogic since, I believe, 2017, 2018. He was still on Fox at the time. And there were a couple of early indicators. One of them, he did a monologue where he was just launching into an investor who had made the signal moral error, in his opinion, of buying a firm that was going out of business. He had bought the firm, it was in Wisconsin, some industrial firm, and he basically sold off the pieces that made it indebted, and then he had tried to relaunch the business or sell it. And this was a great sin, according to Tucker, and he used all sorts of terms like vulture capitalism to describe all of this, because the idea is that if free markets don't work the way that Tucker Carlson wants them to work, then free markets are immoral and wrong and evil. About a year later, Tucker was on my show, and he was talking about self-driving cars. And I asked him whether he would outlaw self-driving cars. He'd made the case to do so. And I said, why, on what grounds, on what governmental grounds would you outlaw self-driving cars? And Tucker said, I would do so on the basis of safety. And I said, Tucker, that makes no sense. You can watch this, it's on tape. I said, Tucker, that makes no sense. Self-driving cars will be significantly safer than human-driven cars. And he said, you asked me why, on what grounds I would ban them, not what's true. And that's kind of the whole story. So, I think that Tucker Carlson is steeped in grievance. He believes that America is fundamentally bad in some of its founding principles. He thinks it has gone completely wrong. It is not a misnomer to say that he thinks pretty much everything America has done since World War II has been wrong, nefarious, and indeed evil. Satanic, he might call it, right? I mean, that's the kind of language that he uses. I think he feels himself to be part of an aggrieved group of people who have been ground underfoot by a nefarious coterie who may have certain types of last names. While proclaiming, obviously, that he is not in any way discriminatory. Of course, it's all just happenstance. And so again, without getting into why he is saying what he's saying, I will say any person who is now making the overt case that the world would be better off if the United States ceded power to Russia and China, which they think he is saying overtly right now, and that the president, he's making the case that the president of the United States is the Antichrist. Right? He's literally doing that. Right. Okay, like I don't know what's going on with him, but it's a very, very strong case against ingesting numbers of ALP pouches.
Thank you.
Hi, Ben. Before I ask my question, I want to say thank you. I found out about the University of Austin 5 years ago from your channel.
Oh, good.
I would
I'm
not
glad.
be here if it wasn't for you. I did not apply anywhere else. I wanted to be here because of you and you presenting this to me. The preamble established the foundational terms of our country 250 years ago, laying out the self-evident truths. The challenge for us today in 2026 is whether we'll respond to the concluding appeal in the Declaration and commit our, just as the Founding Fathers did, lives, fortune, sacred honor to the proposition that these truths remain self-evident. And throughout time, as the country's grown, we've got more diverse. Frederick Douglass did not share in that promise of 1776, but he believed in it more fervently than many who did. What can we do 250 years now to recultivate a generation of American citizens to help want to pledge their lives, sacred honor to the commitment of these self-evident truths, that they remain self-evident?
So it's a great question. I think that the most important thing that we express in our daily lives and in our action is gratitude for the country we live in. The massive ingratitude that is... the unbelievable and ignorant ingratitude that is spread across the country, it's beyond reason to me. It makes no sense at all. It requires an extraordinary amount of ignorance about the way the rest of the world works, or indeed how all of human history has worked, in order to come up with the idea that America is somehow in outlier fashion terrible. America is in outlier fashion unbelievably wonderful. And there is a reason why literally billions of people would kill to get into the country. Because this is the greatest place on earth. It remains the greatest place on earth. We're all lucky to be here. And anybody who refuses to say that is lying. Now, there's a corollary to that, which I do think that we should do some tough talk to people who are not grateful for what they have. I think there are an enormous number of people who sit around, for lack of a better word, bitching about their lives and pretending they don't have the ability to rise, or that bad decision making is somehow excused by the evils of the system. And that seems to me an aspect of weakness that needs to be called out at every turn. That doesn't mean there aren't terrible things that happen in life. Doesn't mean some people aren't unlucky. Doesn't mean that every decision is going to be met with success, even if it's a good decision. What it does mean is that if you make more right decisions than wrong in the United States, you have a better chance than anywhere on earth at any time in human history of succeeding than anyone. And so if you're failing, the first place you should be looking is in the mirror, not out the window.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Shapiro. Thank you so much for being here. It's a pleasure to have you here and speak to you today. I wanted to ask that in a world that politics is so polarized right now, and at the end of the day, we're all humans, but we seem to be assigning these labels to our identities of I am a Democrat, I am a Republican, and this is furthering us more and more and polarizing our society. I wanted to ask you, from everything that you've learned, what do you see as the common ground and the common vision that can reunite both extremes to furthering America, to furthering our institutions, and ultimately lead to less polarization, more collaboration between two sides when it's so polarized nowadays?
So the truth is that I think the vast majority of Americans actually want still, when you're not online, and online is a massive problem, I think the vast majority of Americans still want basically the same thing. They want to get married, they want to have kids, they want to have a job, they want to have a family, they want upward mobility for themselves and for their children, they want to go to a church where people care about them, they want to be part of a community where people care about them, and they want a country where their freedoms are still capable of being exercised. I think Democrats and Republicans want that in the main. And I think that this is why one of the things that I've said very often is I think that we should try to avoid words like they without mentioning the antecedent. This happens a lot. Something bad happens in America and we say, they did it. And you don't say who they is, which allows somebody else to fill in the blank of what they is. They could be the left, it could be the right, it could be the Jews, it could be whatever. And the reality is that we should be very specific about our critiques because specificity is a friend to unity. Vagueness is a friend to chaos. Right? When you're vague, it allows people to take it any way that you want, and it allows them to put themselves on your side or on the other side, and it creates artificial divisions. When you're very specific about the things that you're talking about, and this is why I try to be as meticulous as I can about my language on my show, for example, because of that, I think that you end up with a strange amount of bipartisanship. Because if you say to somebody, listen, here's what I want to do with the healthcare system, then you list 10 things. It may be that they agree with you on 4 of them. Okay, well, great. That's more than they thought they did before. Whereas if you just say they want to kill 20,000 people with their healthcare program, who is they? Why do they want to kill you? Right? And that creates also, by the way, permission structures for violence. I think one of the reasons we've seen this massive uptick in violence in the United States on a political level is because we're creating these gigantic permission structures where we basically say there are a group of people out there. They want to hurt you. They're an existential threat to you. Therefore, the only thing that is justified is violence against them. Or at least violence is justified against them. And certain structures of thought lend themselves to this more than others. But yeah, I think you're right. Like when you meet a human being, the first thing you tend not to ask them, listen, we all use shorthand, right? I mean, when somebody says they're a Democrat, okay, we understand they're probably pro-choice, they're probably for higher taxes, they're probably left on social issues. Yeah, but we really should, if you have the time, you should dig below the label. Because sometimes what you'll find is that many of the reasons they think they're a Democrat are reasons they probably should not be voting that way. And that's a strange thing that happens in a lot of conversations, you'll notice. Somebody will say, what I really want is flourishing families. And you'll say, okay, well, which policy is best match? Again, specificity allows you to get somewhere in a conversation.
Thank you.
Hello. At UATX, it's an example of rebuilding the institution of education. And instead of repairing Harvard, instead people sought out to make their own institution of education. But there's a lot of other institutions that have failed us, like medicine or government, which are going to be a lot harder to rebuild, and instead we need to repair them. What are the avenues that we need to use to repair our institutions which have failed us?
So first of all, I think that some of them will actually be easier to replace than repair. So I think in the institutions of medicine, for example, there's no reason why the AMA needs to be the charter organization for medicine, for example, or the APA. Right? Those institutions are eminently replaceable. It just takes some courage and some solidarity in order to make that happen. And there are, in fact, competing organizations in that space. Again, the private sphere, it's a lot easier to do this. When it comes to the government, much, much more difficult. And the reason that it's much more difficult in the government is because politicians make bank from lying to you. And again, I think most of the politicians that I know are not willfully trying to lie, but I think that the way that most people get elected is not by telling you, I can't solve your problems, you can solve your problems. It's a pretty bad electoral pitch. It also, by the way, happens to be the only true electoral pitch. The vast majority of problems in your life are solvable by you. And if you're looking to government to solve those problems, you're looking to the wrong place. The best pitch would be something like, I can get government out of the way so you can solve your own problems, right? That would be the best electoral pitch. But politicians, that's very likely to be defeated in many cases by somebody who's going to say, no, 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 you sit back, I'll take care of it for you. Now, I think that at a certain point, the American people are going to get tired of people telling them they're going to fix it. What we seem to be doing right now, politically, is swiveling between parties telling you that only they can fix. Right? I love President Trump for a lot of reasons. There are a lot of things he does that are really, really good. But I will say that the President Trump's approach to government, which is I'm going to fix it for you, at least rhetorically, I think is wrong. I don't think it's his job to fix the economy for me. So whenever I hear presidents say, I'm creating jobs, you're not creating jobs. Presidents don't create jobs. They suck money out of the private sector and then they redistribute it to places they think it ought to go. But they're not creating the jobs. It's private entrepreneurs and markets that are creating those jobs. So it's going to take an awakening on the behalf of the American people. I think the most likely scenario, honestly, is that the federal government keeps growing and growing and growing. People keep moving down to places like Texas, to places like Florida. You end up with a massive divide in the country politically between blue states, which get bluer, and red states, which get redder. And then probably the impossibility of governing a country as divided as that means that there has to be a kind of renewed baseline federal redistribution of power back down to the state level just as a solve. Which, by the way, wouldn't be the craziest thing. I mean, it's kind of funny that now we think of, oh, when the United States was founded, everybody was unified. Nobody thought of themselves as an American at the beginning. If you go back and you read the way that all the founders talked about themselves, they talked about themselves as a New Yorker, as a Virginian, as a Bostonian. Right? They talked about themselves as like the state that they were from, which is why the South referred to the Civil War as the war between the states. Right? It wasn't that we are Confederates and they are Unionists. It was a war between states. And so the sort of grand federalization scheme or nationalization scheme in politics will have to, I think it'll be naturally reversed because it's unlivable.
Howdy, my name is Noah, and I'm very excited to finally see you not on the screen. You're definitely a big part of my childhood, so I thank you for that.
You're welcome, and now I'm old, so.
So one of the most important things that you have is that you always say you go approach things with facts and logic. What I'm curious is, there are oftentimes really huge contexts to debates. So how do you know when you've gotten to what's important, like you've gotten enough context to what's important, and that you're not being influenced by your own biases?
So, I think we're all influenced by our own biases, obviously. I think that you have to have a good feedback loop in terms of people who are going to check you on those and tell you when you're wrong. And that's something you should have just in your personal life, let alone your political life. People who will tell you the truth about things, even when they're hard. And you have to cultivate people who care about you, so it's coming from a good place. And that's the way to stay sane, and it's the way to have a good life, let alone a sort of good political outlook. Obviously, when it comes to cultivating the proper context for things, the best thing that you can do is read and read and read and read and read and read. Truly. Just reading history, reading books. I know books have gone out of fashion. I know they're not out of fashion here, which is great. Exactly, not here. But in a lot of other places, they've gone totally out of fashion. You can only have context when you know a broader context. You can only have broader context when you actually know a broad panoply of things, and usually you should read an entire book to even get one look at that. And it is kind of insane. Like what I do for a living is I talk about an enormous number of topics, okay? There are experts on those topics who are more expert than I in pretty much all of those fields. What makes you an expert in the public commentariat space in politics is you read 2 books on a thing. Because most Americans have read 0 books on a thing, right? And the ones who are fairly informed have read 1 book on a thing. So if you've read 2 books on a thing, this makes you like so much more knowledgeable than the vast majority of the population. I mean, honestly, if I'm going to talk about a thing and really not bring on an expert to talk about it, I'd like to have read 5 or 6 books on a thing minimum. But I think that that's going to provide you the proper context. And again, I think it's totally fair to say the 3 most important words in the English language, I don't know. You're just allowed to say, I don't know. One of the things that happens on X, which is always hilarious, is that somebody who was a Ukraine expert since 30 seconds ago will suddenly become an Iran expert when they didn't know what the Strait of Hormuz was or where it was on the planet until 10 seconds ago. They shift expertise to expertise, of course, not having achieved any expertise in those particular areas. I think it's definitely possible to say, I don't know enough about that. Maybe I should do some reading before I come back on that one.
Thank you.
What do you think of how, like, the last two elections became fairly populist? And then the UK's Reform Party is also a very populist movement. Do you think we can come back from populism as the West, or do we need to fundamentally move to different parties and create new parties instead of move back from populism?
So I think Britain is obviously constituted governmentally very differently than the United States, right? You can have a third or a fourth or a fifth party in Britain that can be successful. I mean, the Reform Party didn't exist until 5 seconds ago. So you can do that in Britain. In the United States, it's a two-party system, much easier to take over one of the established parties than it is to remake a third party, which is why Trumpism is different than Bushism. It's why what comes next for the Democrats is likely to be even more left than Obamaism, which was significantly more left than Clintonism. So yeah, I think that when it comes to populism itself, I do not like populism. I think that populism is not a philosophy, it is an approach. And that approach tends to be, again, lowest common denominator. There are certain areas where I think populism, there's a case to be made for it. The case that I would largely make for populism is in moral populism, but that is because most people get their morals from their parents, and most parents get their morals from the sort of I would say the gas left in the tank from Western civilization. And so, you know, if you want to do a moral populism, it's sort of like the William F. Buckley, I'd rather listen to the first 100 names in the Boston phone book than the professors at Harvard. I agree with that kind of populism because the first 100 names in the Boston phone book probably went to church more often than the professors at Harvard. When it comes to things like economics, no. I mean, no. Because the true populism in economics would be, we all have the same, we get to all each have our independent opinions. It's like the most populist thing in economics is called private property and free markets, where we all have our individual opinions. But that's not what economic populism is. Economic populism is 51 of us think the other 49 of you should pay our bills, right? And that or 50 or 80 of us think that you 20 over there are screwing us, and so we're going to confiscate your property. Or 90 of us don't like this one guy over there, and so what we're really going to do is we're going to regulate the hell out of him or subsidize his rival in order to destroy him. So yeah, no, I'm not a fan of populism, but I think again, you know, it takes a long time to build the wonders of Western civilization, a very short time to break them. And populism has been a tactic used for literally millennia at this point, so nothing new.
All right. Hey, thank you very much for coming here. God bless you. Keep doing the good work. All right. So I've noticed the problem, right? The big problem that's being described is mass indoctrination, which naturally leads to mass change of opinion if it succeeds. So I'm wondering, what do we do if the mass opinion is changed? Because if you've noticed in other countries like Canada, for example, guns were outlawed. Why? I believe at least there was a change in opinion. So the government was able to use that and outlaw guns. So an equivalent thing in America, what would we do?
I mean, obviously, what I'm in the business of is trying to change opinions back the other way, right? So we started a company specifically in order to prevent this, and we need to grow. And there are other people in this space, Barry Weiss being one, who is trying to move away from sort of the traditional left-wing narrative towards something that's more centrist and more interesting. There are a lot of people in the space. I would say in the media space, I'm a lot more hopeful than I was even when we started the business because so many avenues have been opened. I'm a lot more pessimistic when it comes to social media. I think social media has been a bane and a curse. And if I could somehow, I mean, again, here's the only area in life in which I'm a Luddite is when it comes to social media. If I could hit a red button today and destroy it, I would do it. I think social media has been a blight on human existence. I think it's hacked our lizard brains and turned us into morons and taught us that smarts are to be found in unity. It's used all of the flaws in human thinking and then exacerbated those flaws in order to hit our dopamine receptors. And it's really, really bad. I think there can be changes that are made there. I would hope that some of the social media tech bros would do something about that. I don't have a lot of hope for that. But in the meantime, this is one area where I do think state legislation would be good. I'm very much with Jonathan Haidt. I think that social media should be banned for people under the age of 16. I think that I have 4 kids going on 5. I think that those 4 kids going on 5, I'm not going to give them access to anything remotely like social media until they hit 18. I see zero good to it, like zero. Not like there's some good and there's some bad, zero good. They should go and they should hang out with actual human beings and be with those actual human beings.
I agree with you, Ben. Over here. Two people to do three more.
What's funny, Joe, is that all the tech bros agree with me.
Yeah.
Many of the tech bros who designed a lot of this infrastructure banned their kids from using it.
The incentives are very bad for how to make money on these things because it does a dopamine. It's a drug, right? It's just not good.
Yeah.
Good evening. Earlier today, Sir Niall Ferguson described domestic Israeli politics as the hardest thing in the world for him to understand other than astrophysics. I was wondering if you had some insight as to why it's so hard for even a sympathetic outsider to understand the political climate, and if you have any views on the upcoming general.
Okay, so I mean, okay, I can try to explain I actually know a lot about this, okay? Without going into a massive disquisition, basically, we can say this. When it comes to the Israeli population is center-right, okay, very center-right. What I mean by this is that there was a poll recently done of Israelis between the age of 18 and 29, 78% identified as right-wing. Okay, so there are three main issues in Israel right now that have 70 to 80% agreement on. One, military independence. They never want to get caught up short again by somebody denying them military capacity in a time when they need to win a war. Two, everyone needs to serve in the military. This is the most divisive issue in Israel. Basically, you have 10% of the population, which is Arab, and 10% of the population, which is ultra-Orthodox in English, called Haredi in Hebrew, who don't serve in the military. The other 80% say this is crazy, and everyone needs to serve in the military. And third, economic deregulation. Okay, so those are the three issues, and 80% of the population agrees on them. The reason that you've had significant breakdown in Israeli politics is because Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who in his heart agrees with all three of those things, cannot form a coalition based on all three of those things. So he's got a coalition right now that agrees that Israel should be militarily independent and agrees to a large extent on economic deregulation, although there's part of his coalition, the ultra-Orthodox, that are heavily welfare dependent and oppose a lot of the economic deregulation. Okay, that third issue, the one about everybody serving in the army, he would love for the Haredim, particularly the ultra, no one is expecting the Arabs to serve in the army, right, left, or center. When it comes to the ultra-Orthodox, people in Israel want the ultra-Orthodox to serve, except for the ultra-Orthodox, who again are taking a disproportionate share of welfare and also are not serving in the military. But they're part of the coalition because nobody in the center or center-left will join Netanyahu's coalition because they despise Netanyahu. And that is a result of Netanyahu being the most effective single politician in Israeli politics for the last 25 years. Right? He just is. I mean, that's not even descriptive of whether you like him or hate him. Just as a political Machiavellian player, Benjamin Netanyahu is unbelievable at this, which is why all the parties in the opposition, I'm not even kidding, two-thirds of the parties in the opposition are started by people who used to be deputies of Benjamin Netanyahu. Right? Naftali Bennett used to be a deputy to Benjamin Netanyahu. Avigdor Lieberman was a deputy to Bibi Netanyahu. Benny Gantz was a deputy to Bibi Netanyahu. Right? So basically you have a bunch of personality conflicts that are preventing a unity government from doing the things that ought to be done. Now, I think that will end. I do. I think that there will come a point here where a government will arise that actually just moves. Bibi's 76 years old. Right? His dad lived to 100. Ben Zion lived to 101. So he could theoretically be around for a while, to the consternation of Americans, many Americans on the left. But the reality is that there will come an administration that is beyond Netanyahu, in which the center-left all the way out to the right is basically unified, because the left does not exist in Israel. It was destroyed by October 7th. And so then you will have all three of those policies pursued. The truth is Israel is not in existential trouble. Israel is actually domestically in quite good shape. Israel's shekel is trading right now at 3 to 1 to the American dollar. To understand how insane that is, you have to understand that for the last 30, 40 years, the shekel was trading well north of 4, sometimes up to 5. That as of 2 years ago is trading at 4. The Israeli economy, the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange, has gained more in the last 3 years since October 7th than any stock exchange by percentage on planet Earth. So Israel is doing fine. The fact that you can't get a domestic coalition together is again a factor of a pretty poorly put together governmental system. There are real problems with it. They kind of took half from the Brits and they took half from the communists. I'm not even kidding. Their judicial system was taken from the communists and their parliamentary system was taken from the Brits. And their cutoff point is like if they have 4 seats, then you get into Knesset out of 120. It's a mess. It's a mess. That was a little detail, but there you are.
Thank you. Let's do 2 more.
Hi, I have 2 questions. I'm Jonathan. I'm from California. The second question is meant for both of you, but the first question is, where would you point to the starting point of the American culture, like disagreements? And the second question is, in such a time of uproar, like okay, so if you want to preserve American exceptionalism during our era, I've read that a couple of texts by Ray Dalio that suggest that great powers fall every 250 years. We're nearing that period of time. Well, actually, we are at that period of time. What are like two main metrics that America needs to succeed on in order to preserve our exceptionalism?
Okay, so I'll answer the second question first, mainly because I don't remember the first question. The second question, so first of all, anybody who sells you a nostrum based on years, like at 250 years, everything will collapse. I'm sorry, it's nonsense. It's nonsense. I mean, the Roman Empire lasted a hell of a lot longer than 250 years. And the United States is going to last a hell of a lot longer than 250 years, I think. So the sort of like, oh my gosh, he's giving us the date. The beautiful thing about making predictions like that is if you're right, you make bank off it for the rest of time. And if you're wrong, nobody remembers. It's one of the beauties of the political sphere. If you make a terrible prediction, nobody remembers it. If you get it wrong 99 times, but that one time you said Trump was going to win in 2016, you can make bank off that forever. It's fantastic. Anyway, so as far as what America needs to do, a couple of things that America needs to do. It needs to re-embrace the principles of free market capitalism. Re-embrace them. No one, right or left, no one, and this is the part that drives me crazy, no one is making a moral defense of free markets. Even free marketeers make a utilitarian defense of free markets. They work really well. That's true. But guess what? Most people who have grown up under a free market don't even understand the alternative to a free market, so they think that the natural state of mankind is prosperity, which is not true. The natural state of mankind is penury, starvation, and death. That is and all you have to do to check that out is take an airplane most places on Earth. Right? So the thing that we need to defend is the idea that free markets are inherently good. They are, because they're a reflection of human innovation and human creativity, the fact you own your own labor. They're an outgrowth of your honor and dignity as an individual. That's what free markets come from. And we need to defend it on those grounds. And then secondly, we need to obviously defend the principles of equal justice before law, equal rights before law. If you had to pick two, these would be the two. Right? Private property and equal rights before law. Right? Or life, liberty, and property, you might say, if you were John Locke. Right? If you defend life, liberty, and property, you're in pretty good shape. A country that gets away from any of those three is going to be in serious trouble. I think America can defend and should defend all three of those things.
Awesome. I'll answer offline, but I think fighting for our principles and fixing our institutions, which is what we're trying to do with UATX, you got to build some new ones, and we got to fix some other ones. But let's do the last question here.
So this was touched on earlier with having a support system of people that you can trust to fact check you for bias. I wanted to ask if you have any practical advice for students that want to inform ourselves. There's a lot of information. Some of it is true, some of it is medium, some of it is really not true, and it can be really overwhelming wanting to inform yourself, but wanting to find the truth in facts. And what advice do you have?
I mean, listen, we all have heuristic shortcuts, as I say. You have to find people that you can trust because you can't be an expert on everything. And so what I would say is if people keep making bad predictions, those people should not be listened to. If people keep making, based on their ideas, predictions that keep coming false, then probably they're not worth listening to. If their response to a request for evidence is to be offended or upset or to claim that you are doing something wrong, then you shouldn't listen to them either. What I usually say to people is that you should read legacy media publications, and then you should read conservative publications, and usually where there's crossover, that's the basis of fact, and then everything else is the opinion. So I've some friends on the left, like I'm friendly with Van Jones, I'm friendly with Bill Maher. If you listen to my show and then you listen to what Van says, Van and I come at it from very, very different angles, but our basis in fact is going to be pretty similar because Van is a reasonable human, even if we disagree. And the same thing is true for a Bill Maher or say for a John Fetterman. Like they're going to be operating off the same basis of fact. So where we agree, that would usually be the basis of fact, and where we disagree, that's usually the opinions that we're drawing from the facts based on a different lens on the world. That's a good way to get informed, I think.
Thank you.
All righty. Thank you so much. Thanks, I appreciate it.
Closing remarks.
Thanks,
Ben.
All right, let me close it up tonight. And one of my least favorite part of my job is that often I get to come and speak after Neil and Ben, and that's not what I was trained for in my life. I'm a simple statistician that likes numbers a lot. So, but we'll try. Anyway, so thank you so much. Thank you really very much for being here tonight. This is a special night for us at UATX, and hopefully some of you that are considering joining us see that what we're trying to build here. So I'm just trying to wrap up in some words part of what I was hoping actually Ben would talk a little bit about his book, his latest book. He talked about some of the other books, but his latest book talks about lions and scavengers. So the idea that, and I think some of you probably read, if you did, Nate Silver's book on decision making, and he talks about the villagers and the Riverians. So there's a lot of similarities between those labels. We talked about labels being a bad thing, but sometimes labels are informative about our mindset, informative about our worldview. And I think the worldview of the student that we're trying to create at UATX is what Ben was putting in words when he was talking about lions. Lions, he talks about, are the hunters, are the warriors, are the weavers of the civilization in which we stand here. The ones that are building the world in front of us, the ones that are doing good things, the ones that wake up in the morning and don't blame others for their ills, but rather go out and fix their problems. So I'm very thankful for Ben to give me the vocabulary, because it helps me a lot in talking about what we're trying to do here at UATX. So American lions have championed freedom. We talk about freedom a lot tonight. And they have championed freedom from the founding through the Civil War, through World War II, and through the Cold War. But somehow the forces of tyranny and the bad ideas they defeated over the centuries didn't disappear. They morphed, they mutated, they infected other systems, and they migrated into the academy. So what we're trying to do here is somehow resolve that and restore what the foundation ideas of a university should be. Our universities are supposed to be the place where the next generation of lions were formed, but instead, they decided to embrace the worldview of the scavengers. So what do? What do lions do? Well, we solve problems. We build anew. And that's what we're doing at UATX. And that solution is to focus our attention on forming the students. Is to respect them, is take them very seriously, enough to understand that we have a role in changing them. So this is not a place where you come in and like, well, it doesn't matter what you become. We're a place where we care about what we become. We'll work with you for you to become what you should become. And that's the reason why the University of Austin was founded. And in our mission calls for the cultivation of 3 qualities. They are fundamental for these lions to go out in the world. The first one is freedom, in the deepest classical sense. We are forging free minds capable of weighing arguments, distinguishing good from bad, and reasoning from evidence. And this kind of freedom requires discipline and hard work. Our students work long days, and they argue through the great books and solve hard problems together, face to face, in the cloister, with no screens to hide behind. That's where real thinking and real friendship begins. The second quality is industriousness. Benjamin Franklin said that students should think clearly and argue from evidence, but also survey a field, keep a ledger, build something with their own hands. Our students learn from the classics, but also learn math, AI, and engineering, while engaging in real partnerships with real companies building consequential things. We're forging intellectual lions with calluses in their hands. And the third quality is a sense of duty. Our students are learning that they are inheriting the American Republic and the traditions of the West and institutions of a free society. These were handed down to them by people who sacrificed for them, and you can only feel duty towards something if you first take the trouble to deeply understand it. UATX exists to forge lions who are free, industrious, and responsible. We are here hoping to produce the next generation of leaders like Ben Shapiro, like Joe Lonsdale, like Barry Weiss, like Jeff Yass, and frankly, like many of you in this room tonight. People that build things, people who defend the civilization that made their freedom possible, and who hold the fabric together when it's in danger of fraying. Jeff and Janine Yass's gift was not only incredibly generous, but was ingenious. It challenges us to build a university whose entire existence depends on our mission. We charge no tuition, take no government money, and only succeed if our graduates succeed. If they don't, we have no way to survive, and we have no reason to survive. Every other college gets paid regardless of what it contributes to the formation of their students. We survive only if we deliver. They help us lay the foundation for independence and accountability. But we're still a young institution. We're still growing. Our alumni base is here with you tonight, and they're all 19, 20 years old. Someday they'll be the ones sustaining this university, paying it forward with their donations. But between now and then, I need you to help me build this bridge. So let me speak clearly and frankly with you, know where we are. Since the Yass's gift, we started a $300 million campaign, of which we're now at $100 million in. And that will make, if we complete the campaign, when we complete this campaign, this institution will be a permanent feature of American life. By contributing to this campaign, you're helping us recruit world-class faculty, grow our student body, and expand our facilities. Some of you in the room, many of you in the room, have already given to us generously. And I want you to know that your money right now is in the classroom right now, paying faculty who turns down safer careers to be here with us, and it's shaping the lives of the students who spend the next 50 years leading our country. But I'm asking you to go further, double down, increase your commitment, help us grow at this inflection point where every dollar has an outsized impact. Some of you are here tonight considering helping us for the first time. And if you're here, it's because you thought that this idea deserves some of your attention. And I'm asking you to act on that instinct. Don't wait for certainty. The people who built our great institutions didn't have certainty. They had the right idea at the right time and the conviction to act on them. America's best days are ahead, but they won't happen by accident. They will happen because a small number of people today decided to invest in the next generation of leaders who will sustain our freedom and our prosperity. Ben writes that civilization is always one generation away from falling to the scavengers. And what lions need to win is courage. Every generation, our freedom demanded it. In every generation, someone has stepped forward, not because success was guaranteed, but because the mission was worth it. The University of Austin needs your courage. The University of Austin needs your generosity. Help us raise the next generation of lions. Thank you very much.